Welcome to another episode of Talks with Tech Leaders. Today I'm joined by Rob from BearTech. So Rob, would you mind just giving a bit of intro to yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Kaz. So as you said, I'm a technologist at heart, but I'm a technologist that kind of looks at things in a slightly different way. So it's not just about cool tech or gadgets and gizmos and things. It's about how can I solve a problem? What's a problem I'm going to solve? But also with quite a focus on UX and UI and really kind of putting myself in our users' seats and then understanding how the tech can make their lives better.
What got you interested in tech to begin with? Let's go right back to the start.
I've always been interested in it, right the way from school, really. Wanted to do it as a career, but I just couldn't kind of seem to get into it. I went to uni in Manchester for a couple of years, dropped out, came home, ended up in retail. Worked in retail till 2005, so kind of a good 5 years. Worked my way up to be a manager in Morrison's. And then my son was born, and I kind of looked at this tiny little bundle of joy and said, I don't want to work 100 hours a week over Christmas. So he was born in the July, went back to uni in September, did 3 years at Teesside, graduated, and I was lucky enough to get a job straight out of uni. So it's always been an underlying passion, or an underlying kind of thing I find easy in the world. But actually, now I go out looking for the really complicated things.
Yeah. So, no, it's quite interesting. What do you think? Was it just the hours that made you think, I want to spend more time, I want something more for myself? And was that the interest that you felt was going to be what's going to sort of like scratch that itch a little bit?
I think if I look back through my career, I look back through my life really, it all really started for me when I was probably about 9 years old. My stepdad was an IT manager. There would have bits of computers around. There was always a computer. You could build your own computer and all this kind of stuff. So it was always something that was in me, which probably because it made sense, it was logical, and I could put things together and create something. And I'm not an artist, but I had the ability then to satisfy that creative itch that I think as human beings we all have. Don't get me wrong, the hours over Christmas and things is something that I refer to all the time. But I think the real driving force behind it was I wanted to find a better life. And I saw technology and what technology can do. And even back then, we're talking about 2005, 6, 7. It hasn't got to where it is today. But I could see the problems it could solve and the difference it could make. And also it just made sense.
Yeah, I think that was probably around the same time that I started uni as well. But I went to Leeds in 2006. Yeah,
I'm lucky.
No, it's a lovely place, Leeds, to be fair. So getting your first job in IT, how did you find that? Was it a challenge or was it quite straightforward?
It was pretty straightforward. So I was very lucky. In my final year at uni, a local business, a waste business, had approached the uni and said, we have this database, we have this system. We want to create a portal over the top of it. And we want to surface that data to our customers. And this is around about when like Google Analytics was just coming out and kind of the idea of online reports was something relatively new. So they went to the uni, they said, look, can you help us with this? The uni said yes. They brought in Barry Hebron, who was one of the senior lecturers there. He said, oh, I know this guy, Rob. Me and Barry worked together, and then they hired me straight out of uni. So it was one of those roles that I landed on my feet because of the work I'd done, but then I just got all the challenges in the world. So it was like, my mouse is broken, the mail server's down, we want to implement VMware, we need a new feature for the website, we want to add this capability to it, and you had to work it all out on the fly, because uni doesn't teach you any of that.
Yeah, no, I can imagine it would have been quite challenging. But I guess that's where you learn a lot from as well, don't you? From
adversity. So I'd never looked after a mail server in my life. What does that even mean?
Yeah.
How and it's the basics, but actually you work it out and you solve the problems.
Yeah. And then from then would you say, because from an outsider looking, I mean, we've known each other for a long time. I'd say that your career seemed to have progressed quite quickly, and you've been, from the time that I've known you, you've always been in a senior sort of leadership type role, like the CTO, head of engineering. So I guess the area that I'm not familiar with is sort of between that. So how did that sort of journey go, and how did you progress up the ranks?
I think it evolved quickly because firstly, I had a grounding as a manager. I'd been a leader in another business in a completely different vertical. But the other thing was I had to learn to communicate in those previous roles, and I just brought that with me. So I had more of a rounded life skill, which was, yes, I was a technology guy and I could solve problems with it, but also I could sit down and I could relate to you and I could explain that really complex thing in a very simple way and tailoring it for my audience. And I think that's one of the things I've carried with me through my career. If I can sit down, it was at the time with an FD and explain it, and then sit with a CEO and the board, that's how you progress very quickly in this.
Yeah, I've spoken to other guests on the podcast as well, and they've talked about where they've been in like customer service jobs. And I guess like retail, you would be doing that where you're speaking to customers every day. You come up with solutions. You know, there's some arms company with a problem. You know, I'm looking for this, or can you advise on this? So I think being able to take those transferable skills into software. I think sometimes people think, oh, I just want a dev job, or that's all I'm going to do, so I'm not going to look at other areas. But I think there is a lot of skills to be attained from sales jobs, customer service jobs.
So where we are here in Middlesbrough, I used to work for Orange Broadband just in centre and North East. I used to work in the retentions team when I was at uni. So for 4 hours a night, I'd be on the phones ringing people up who'd give notice to leave Orange Broadband.
Yeah.
And my job was to save them.
Yeah.
And you learn fast.
Yeah.
And you take all the hits and you learn how to understand and empathise and really listen to them. And I think that's one of the key skills I learned there was it wasn't about what you said, it was about how well you listened and then how well you understood their issue so that then you could communicate a potential solution. And that's all I do today.
Yeah.
I sit down with customers all over the world and I just say, tell me your problem.
Yeah.
A lot of the time I have to say to a customer when they're describing what they're looking for, I just ask why. Yeah. Why do you want to do this? What's the problem you're trying to solve? Sometimes they don't know. And that relationship that builds in, we help them understand the why and what they're trying to do it for before we get anywhere near writing tech.
Yeah. So I think that'll take us quite nicely into you speaking about your customers. So you co-founded BearTech with your wife, Ally. Yeah. So how did that come about?
They always say never work with family. But thankfully, Ally and I are lucky. We worked together many years ago. One of the things that it was really that fortuitous moment in our life. So I'd left a position in 2022 and decided I was going to take 3 to 6 months out. Around about the end of that 6 months, Ally was made redundant from her role. And we spent all that next summer just walking the dog, stopping off and having a cheeky little drink, bit of lunch, you know. And we really enjoyed ourselves. And what became very prevalent in our minds of when we reflected and we talked was we didn't want to go back to corporate. And it was the real driving force for us. At the same time, I was kind of thinking, oh, I need to go and find something to do with the rest of my life. I was only 41, 42 years old. So I was applying for new positions. I was having conversations. And what became really apparent was there was a need for some form of fractional technology leadership. The economy then, back in 23, right at the start of the year, wasn't brilliant. We had the cost of living crisis. We had all those things. So businesses were actually cutting their cloth accordingly. But they were cutting their cloth in such a way that they still needed that technical leadership. And the boards of directors and CEOs still needed the technical input, but they couldn't afford it or they weren't willing to risk it. So as we went through the summer and those conversations started, I found I was getting ghosted. Or roles were getting de-scoped, or they were just completely just going off on a tangent in another direction. And sometimes I ended up making them do that. So I sat down with one customer who I was on a call with, and she said, the chief exec said to me, I need a CTO to come on board to do this. And actually, 7 minutes, I'll never forget that, 7 minutes into the interview, I just stopped her and said, you don't need a CTO. You need to go and hire 2 junior devs who can just put your vision into an MVP and go and get funding. And she still talks to me today. And that's our ethos is we're not just after a quick pound in the bank. We're not after that. We're after real relationships where we have trust, and there's honesty from the very start. And that's what we built the business on. So my wife and I started the business November 14th, 2023. And we started it with a customer on day one. We were very lucky. I'd landed a fractional CTO role. The next day, a second customer signed, and we thought, oh, this is easy, we got this made. And then no more customers signed. We kind of got to the middle of January, and I was working with these customers on a fractional basis. But what became very apparent was they needed the technology expertise and guidance, but actually the development teams that they had in-house couldn't fulfill what they needed. And Ali and I sat down, and then we looked at it and thought, actually what we need to do is create our own software development team. So a team that isn't there all the time, that can work on very specific statements of work, deliver value into an organization, allow them to move along their strategic path, and then we step away, and we can always come back if we need it. And that's where we are today. So we've now got 3 primary kind of streams of work. We've got the fractional C-suite, which also includes things like fractional head of dev, that kind of stuff. We've also got the software development team. And then we've got people augmentation. So customer says, can I have a tester for a month? And one of the guys just goes and spends a month, does what they need to do, and they come back and work on other projects.
Yeah. Were you aware of this term fractional before like 2023, or had it been something that's historically happened? Because I've only really just heard about it really in the sort of last year, speaking to people, because it's in a lot of industries. So you even get like fractional recruiters now that come in like short-term basis, fractional FDs, or financial advisors, or directors. So like, had you heard of this term, or how did you like think that this could be an opportunity here?
I don't think anybody had really heard of it, or people weren't using it. You kept getting interim, was I think the term before it. A bit like when you talk about CI/CD and DevOps. Nobody really heard of it, but as it just amalgamated from one to another. So having never heard of it before 2023, I'd seen it everywhere through 2023. Yeah. And I always equate to it a bit like I'd worked in AI for years, but actually the world woke up when ChatGPT became available.
Yeah.
I said, everything's AI, AI, AI. Or I'd worked in it for years, so I have that kind of thing of AI is more than just ChatGPT whenever I talk to anyone.
Yeah.
But then I think, in the recruitment world, in that kind of space, fractional now is something that people are really embracing and really kind of thinking, I can gain access to all that expertise, all that knowledge.
Yeah.
And I don't have to pay a full-time salary that's permanent.
Yeah. Do you have like in your mind in terms of how long I know it could probably vary depending on how big a company is, because I know you work with some really, really big companies as well, but do you have some like a time frame in mind in terms of we want to deliver this in this amount of time, and I guess if we can't, then we haven't done our job properly? So do you do that, or is that sort of different for each size of company you work with?
It depends, really. Some customers pay us on a retainer basis, so I just want to have access to a team of developers for a year. The ones that are really fun, the ones that are kind of really get the blood going, are clear statements of work that have defined problems, defined outcomes, and we can then define the gap between those two things to detail how it should probably work. And I think the key thing there when we work with the customer is, yes, it's written down, it's a signed contract, but actually the understanding is the how it's done can always be fluid. There's always new tech coming, there's always new ways to do things. Something all of a sudden might cost more tomorrow than it did today, and we have to roll with that. And it's always about getting value for money for our customer. So the what we're trying to achieve is always set in stone. And those are always the best things, because you know where the end goal is. And especially in a business like ours, when we work with multiple customers across the country, it's always that element of planning people's time. When is the next project due to start? When's one project due to finish? When do people need training time? Do they need recuperation time? You've got holidays, you've got all that kind of stuff in play, but you need to be able to plan. And delivering to a customer on a date and to a specific spec is something that I would say fires us up more than anything.
Yeah. Is there any particular industries that you work in? Have you tried to find like a particular niche? I know you said you had some customers that joined from the start as well. So what's been your sort of, I guess, strategy when it comes to customers?
It's an interesting thing because as a business, we've tried to go, do we focus on, let's just say, solicitors, or do we focus on electric vehicle chargers? The truth is, what we see is a very broad range of customers. We have customers that are in the legal sector. We have customers that are in fintech, but we also have customers that produce 3D printed vehicles. So the variety and also the depth of relationship with customers is something that's completely dependent on the company that we're working with.
Yeah. And tech-wise, are you tech agnostic, or is there any particular technologies where you feel that you're particularly strong with?
We're pretty tech agnostic. As a team, I could list off 15 different languages that I'd say we are pretty well versed in. We're looking at cloud, Azure, AWS, Google, even a bit of Siemens in there as well. But I think, when we look at the market and the demand, we're actually quite surprised of what we found, because 80% of our opportunities or the conversations we have revolve around the Microsoft stack.
Right.
So we see a lot of .NET, we see a lot of Azure. Even though most of the team spent the vast majority of their life in AWS and in other tech, .NET's always been there. It was with me from the start of my career. And actually back in 2014, I led the team that architected the world's first telephone call in the Azure cloud. Right. So before Microsoft could do it with Skype, we were doing it at a company called Teleware based out of Yorkshire.
Yeah, no, I'm familiar with Teleware, yeah. Could you maybe give us some reasons as to why you've had such early success with BearTech? So you haven't been even sort of, I guess, around for a full year yet. So
no, November.
What would you say some of the things that have really helped you with the early success you've had?
A lot of it's due to our values. There's no BS. We call a spade a spade. We don't try and dress it up as an earth-moving implement. We gain trust with our customers because we just do what we say. There's no frills. It's a case of I've sat with customers and gone, you don't want to do that. Just sweat the assets you've got. And they kind of look at you like you're mad because you're meant to be trying to make money off me here.
Yeah.
There's no point. Mm. If we can't achieve the goal, we don't set out on the journey.
Yeah.
And I think that's what people really respect.
Yeah.
And when they speak to myself or they speak to Ali, that's what they get. Or they speak to any of our staff, to be fair, that's what they get. They get that straight up, I'm going to tell you as it is, and I don't really sugarcoat much.
What's Ali's role in the company now? Because I know she comes from a recruitment HR background. Is that correct?
Oh, doing her a disservice there, man.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So Ali's background is in people and development.
Right.
So you think about developing talent plans. You think about looking at how a business will evolve in such a way that it becomes an incubator for highly performing teams.
Right.
That was Ali's position in one of her last roles. Was really look at the culture of a business. Look at the values, look at the behaviours, look at the structures that you have in place to create highly performing individuals, to give those people the best opportunity they have in life. When we started the business, there was a clear risk that I could get lost in a rabbit's warren with customer on problems and the tech and sit down with a team and not look up for 3 days. So Ali's the chief exec. Ali's role in the business, she keeps us on plan, she keeps us on track, she reins me in 3 times a day. But the thing is, she can't get distracted with the day-to-day business. She's very much focused on, are we delivering value to our customers? Are we growing the business? And are we on the strategy that we set out to achieve?
Yeah. How big's your team now?
So the team at the minute's just more than 20 people. I'm spread all over the UK. But I think one of our USPs that we'll never deviate from is we offer in-country developers. So if our customers in the UK, our developers that work on that account are in the UK, we don't outsource it. So everything's done in-house, and we never look to do that.
Okay, great. I want to talk a little bit about management then. So usually a lot of the techies and developers I speak to, they go down the route of they're a developer, they're a really good developer, and then they kind of fall into management. It seems like you got into management before your career, IT and tech. So, and then what was that transition like? When, in which company or when did you have your first management role in IT?
We're going back a way. I've always been a leader. and I've always been a leader of individuals. If I go back to Morrison's, I had people who were twice my age, who I was their manager. I don't like the term manager.
Yeah.
It's a very old-fashioned term, and it's one that can denote an authority. I prefer just to be a leader.
Yeah.
So even when I'm working on a fractional basis at the moment, I try and coach and mentor, to guide, to provide examples of behaviours that they might want to reflect on without it being a tell. So I'll kind of show how I've done something, or I'll tell a story of where I've struggled in that certain situation without being critical to the individual. Because the key thing is, you do that, they shut their ears and they don't want to know. And all I'm interested in is helping them be the best version of themselves that they can be. The guys joke about it that, you know, Rob's a Ted Lasso disciple. And in some regard, it's true. You know, I genuinely care. I want them to be the best versions of themselves. They're just not footballers, unfortunately.
Yeah. Have you, so I guess with the amount of years you've been in the industry, you'd have had some certain challenges. You may have like failed a couple of times in certain things. Could you think of like any examples of any, I don't like to use the word failures, but like some like lessons that you've learned that you still like, you know, that stick with you till today?
Are we talking about people or tech?
Just in your experience. It could be people, it could be, you know, in your career, you know, any moments that have been quite challenging, but you were able to overcome them.
There are moments throughout my career where I kind of look back and think, I wish I'd done that differently. Or I look back and I think, I wish that had never happened at all. I think one of the worst moments in my career, and it was one that I'd promised myself I'd never do, was when I had to sit down and tell somebody they were at risk of redundancy. And HR gave me a script to follow. Don't deviate from the script. Classic HR policy. And halfway through, I'd looked up. And this guy had been in the business 20 years. And I could just see the look on his face. And he was at risk of redundancy because of a restructure. And he actually had the opportunity to step up a level. Unfortunately, he decided not to stay with the organisation. But it was one of those real hard moments in my life because I was doing what the best thing was for the business. And the business at that point just couldn't function in the structure it was at. So I had to be brave enough to make those decisions. It's not a great place to be. And the impact it has on the person who's sat on the other side of the table is immeasurable compared to how you feel. But I never thought, I never really truly understood how I would feel in that moment. From a technology point of view, I think I wouldn't class anything as a failure. It was just, I found a new opportunity to learn something. So tried something, it didn't work. We pivot, we go in a different direction, we try something else. And it sounds like a cliche these days, but we've been saying it for years, which is just fail fast. Try something. If it doesn't work, move on. Yeah. Because you found a way for it not to work.
How would you say like your management skills sort of like have improved over the years? Has your style changed at all, or would you say that, you know, because you've been doing it for so long that, you know, you've sort of found your way and it sort of, you know, comes naturally, I guess?
Yeah, it doesn't come naturally. My management style has evolved quite a lot since I met my wife. So I just explained her background, what she did for a living. Before she met me, before I met her, you could say, I was very direct, quite blunt without realising it. I was very much of a tell kind of leader. So just do it like this, or let's just get this done. I've had to learn to evolve and grow and change. And I've only ever reaped the benefit from that. You know, I've learned to bring people on the journey with me. Even if I can see and understand what the end goal is, help them understand how I got from where we are today to there. Because the worst thing in the world is kind of going, well, that's where we need to get to. And I know where we need to get to. But if you don't bring them along the journey, they'll leave you halfway along. And I've been in a position where I sat with a senior UX designer and I was asking him to do something really technical with step-by-step instructions. And after a day of it, he stormed into my office and I'm not happy with this and I don't like this and blah. And I could feel like this redness going up the back of my head. I hadn't explained to him why I was asking him to do it. He thought I was trying to change his role. actually what I was trying to do was give him the context of some amazing stuff we were about to do. And if I'd have set that context, he would have looked at it and experienced it very differently. It was a learn I took, and I've never, since that day, I've never not provided context. And when I sit down with my team or I sit down with customers, I just bang the drum, context, context, context. Because today, if I don't sit down with my team and explain the context of what we're about to do, you can get it very wrong. Thankfully, me and him are still great friends, though.
Yeah, no, that's good. So you'll have worked in a lot of different teams over the years. What would you say has helped you make them into like high-performing teams?
Context and communication, I think, is really key. Pushing them into situations where they have to work things out together. And then one of the things that is really important to me is there's no hierarchy in terms of ideas and voice. Like I've had previously where I've got a placement student who's sat with somebody that's been in the job 30 years. The placement student has the same level of voice when they're sat in sprint planning and sat in architecture sessions, because we can't all know everything. That actual placement student is still working with me today, 6 years later. So I must have done something right. But I think that's the key, is you give people the opportunity for growth. You give them the what we're trying to achieve in the context, and then you just offer them some guidance along the journey and set them challenges. I always go back to when the first Macintosh was being created, and there was a guy who went with Steve Jobs across to Xerox PARC and looked at the first GUI, right, with a mouse and everything. He convinced himself that he'd saw overlapping panes on a desktop. So you know where you see a Word doc, put something in front and you'll see some of the words behind. He convinced himself he'd seen that, and he made it happen. They'd never done it. But having that sense of, I can achieve this, as a leader, if we can foster that in somebody and give them that confidence that they can actually go out and do it, they'll probably end up doing it. Or you failed as a leader.
Yeah. I guess you'd have worked in a lot of diverse teams as well over the years. How important do you think allyship and diversity is in teams?
It's massively important. In fact, it's one of our founding ethoses. Our goal by the end of next year is 50% of our business to be people from a DEI background. Within the tech space, within the Northeast, it's quite difficult. But it's something that's one of our guiding principles. It's something that I've always been guided along. Before DEI was a term, we'd be looking at women in tech, or all of these things all feed into that DEI conversation. The key thing for me is a room full of middle-aged white men, all from the same background. You tend to have the same sense of humour, the same points of view. You share the same articles with each other. Your brains start to think in a similar way. Diversity brings in different points of view, different perspectives, different ideas from all over the place. And it's something that I've always found really important and, in fact, really beneficial for the end result.
I think it's great you've got Ali as the CEO as well, because then it shows that you've got a female in, obviously in like one of the most important positions in the business. I don't know a lot of female founders in tech in the area as well. So I think that would just hopefully build confidence with female developers and people from other backgrounds to see, that this business is actually doing what the values are, rather than just saying this is a value, actually following those values as well.
Well, the thing is, our family is very much led by strong, independent women. Ali's one. My mother-in-law is a little dynamo who, would probably stop a bus with a look. But then I have two amazing daughters who are both fostering their own paths through the world, but they're strong women. And I also have a granddaughter who is very, very independent. So when I kind of think of the women in my world, actually it's just kind of Ali being the CEO of the business. It's something that speaks volumes for our family and our values and our beliefs. And, not saying that the men in the family aren't strong individuals, but actually it's something that we really wanted to make sure that it showed as core to the business.
Yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned about management earlier. You don't like the term, you like the term leader. What in your eyes makes a great leader?
A lot of the time, a great leader for me is just somebody that gets out of the way. Kind of says, we need to get there. And then steps back and looks at the magical ways people think to achieve it. People empowerment is definitely something that's high up on my list. But also, you're there for help. You're there to guide in all shapes. You can guide technically, you can guide behaviourally, you can see some things that are happening within a team. You can take individuals to one side and understand how they're having an impact on the team around them. And ultimately, you're always trying to create a better environment, because that better environment that you fostered as a leader, firstly, functions without you, which is really key. Secondly, when it does that and when you create that environment, it becomes highly performing relatively naturally. The other thing I will say is, though, where you have some individuals that are not able to get to that level, as a leader, it's not about casting them aside or anything. It's about helping them be the best version of who they can be. And sometimes it's just simply a case of you met for a coffee, you sat down with them for an hour, and actually you learned something about them that you never knew, and you end up firing them up even more.
Yeah. Dealing with conflict, how do you tend to deal with conflict in businesses? Do you think it's healthy in business to have conflict?
So conflict's an interesting word, especially when you look at it in the context of different ways that people communicate. So conflict can mean a war. It can mean a war out in the world. It can mean a war in the workplace. Hopefully you never get to that level. But typically what you see is a disagreement between one or more individuals where they can't reach a resolution on their own. And typically it's because they stop listening to each other. They have opposing views on something. They don't listen, so they don't communicate. And that's when conflict starts. That's as a leader when you need to step in and you need to work out some form of conflict resolution. Typically, it's just a case of getting individuals to listen to each other. In some cases, those individuals really have a personal issue with each other. And as leader, I need to listen to what it is and work out a way to mitigate it and then plan for it in the long term.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So you mentioned earlier that you're a remote company, so remote first. Mm-hmm. How did you sort of come to that choice or decision? And do you feel like it's obviously a benefit to your business, or would you consider hybrid in the future, like a lot of companies are doing now, where they're getting people back into the office?
It's an interesting one because some of the individuals in the business would love hybrid working. But we are a remote-first business. It might change, it might evolve. We have many conversations where we think we could get an office. But I think as soon as we do that, it limits the pool of people we can talk to, the pool of individuals that we can work with. The people I've worked with over the past 10 years are now spread all over the UK. And I love to be able to pick up the phone, have a conversation and say, come join BearTech. I don't want to then add the caveat of, but only if you move back to the Northeast. And I think that's what's really key. It's not about where you live. It's about who you are. It's about how you conduct yourself, and it's about your technical abilities. And making sure that you tick all those 3 boxes for the business, you could live on the moon for all I care.
Yeah, great. So I'd like to do a little segment which is to help a lot of developers that I work with, or techies, because I know you've worked across IT. So I work with a lot of junior developers who are looking to get their first job, mid-level developers, senior developers, or even development managers who are looking to make the next step. So yourself, Rob. So I'm sat in front of you. I interview. What sort of things do you look out for, and I guess what sort of advice would you give to somebody who not just interviewing with yourself, but how they can try and make the chance of them being successful at interview higher?
It's a really interesting one because you can test somebody for their technical ability. You can do all sorts of psychometrics to get some form of an insight. But what I do is I ask them, and I do warn them beforehand so they come prepared, just to take me through a time where they've solved a problem. It can be anything, but tell me about a time where you've solved a problem. And it can be the role can be won or lost in the first couple of minutes there. Because if it goes back to what I was talking about earlier, if they don't set context, if I don't know the topic they're talking about, they haven't shared with me just so you know, this is the realm that it's in. I can't track whether they actually solve the problem or not. I'm actually not interested in the resolution. I'm interested in the individual sat opposite me that will sit in a team meeting and say, guys, we need to do this, and this is why we need to do it, and then they communicate the problem. So I'm looking for them to set the context, articulate the problem, and then they'll talk about a solution. And if they haven't done the first two, typically I wouldn't be somebody I'd hire.
Yeah. And would you say that a lot of that's built from like personal experience? Because you mentioned earlier about how you were in a situation where you didn't give context. So I think naturally when people do interview, potential candidates, there's not just bias but personal experience that comes into the recruitment process. Would you think that's fair to say?
I see it occasionally, not internally here. I think one of the things that we're really strong on is we don't hire people that remind us of ourselves. It's one of those things. Most people say, well, they just try and hire another copy of themselves.
Yeah.
In previous organisations, kind of what I've done is, as the hiring manager, I've got them to go through 3 or 4 stages, depending on the seniority of the role, before they've ever spoken to me. So they might do a values-based interview with somebody completely outside the department. They probably then do some form of a technical interview with the senior or with somebody ahead of department. And then they'll move into other processes, potentially, just depending on how senior they are. But I typically like a distanced view from somebody that I'm interviewing for a role so that I've got input from other people within the business, especially the values one. That's really key for me. What did the values interview say? Are they one of us? Will they work really well within an organisation? When I've changed roles in the past and people have expressed an interest to come with me, some people have had to say, you wouldn't fit into this culture. Because I know the individual, because I know the business I'm going into, I'd say to them, you wouldn't enjoy yourself. It's completely different to what is your comfort zone.
Yeah. How important do you think people knowing your values is before interview? So if somebody was to prepare for BearTech, would you expect them to have been on your website, looked at your values, and how important is it to you that they've come prepared with a lot of questions to ask?
The questions thing I agree with. The problem with coming prepared for values is they should just be your values. And if they're not who you are at your core and you are preparing to show our values, you won't last.
I think that's what a lot of companies do. I work with companies where in the assessment is how close to our values are they, but then the values are available on the website. So obviously if they're just going to research that and look into it, you're right, they're probably presenting a false impression themselves. And probably goes back to what you were just saying in your previous point about when people have said, I want to come over to a company with you, then you've said, like, I don't think you'll fit in because that's not your values. So would you say apply for jobs that align more with what you do so then you can give the best version of yourself?
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with a company sharing the values online. It then puts it on the business to make sure they can wean the right values and behaviours out during the interview process. You've just got to be mindful that if you publish them, people will try and show you that actually there is a way to ask questions and there's a way to guide the interview so that you tweak out whether they are a good fit or not.
Yeah.
And there'll be subtleties in language that as an interviewer you'll see as a hook, and you'll go straight down that hole with them and dig into it deeply until you're satisfied that, okay, yeah, I now understand a bit more and I can bring it back out and actually continue on with the interview.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on technical tests?
Obviously, they are valuable. You test somebody against a skill set. You want a Java developer, you set a test in Java. The best thing I've found is where there's a technical test set and it's online and they're writing code that can be tested against with unit tests. But it records the browser. So you can actually watch it back. And you can see if they've just copied and pasted from Stack Overflow or if they've actually built an idea, wrote some pseudocode, refined it and worked it through, and you can see the thought process. Those are my favourite ones. I think one of the key things, and people will hear it throughout our business, is during the recruitment process, It's about the person that's sat in front of you. You can teach somebody a technical skill. You can't teach them to conform to a different value set that isn't the business's.
Yeah.
And I think that's the key thing.
Okay. What sort of learning paths have you been on to like enhance your career, whether that's like technically or in your management, to build up your leadership skills? Sorry, I said management there, leadership skills. What would you say, what would you recommend, and what worked well for Rob?
So this is actually front of mind at the moment, because I've been working with a customer who has a team, and they're recommending them go on training courses and development pathways and things like that. The key things are, for me, when I'm working with an individual, and it's very much about that individual. So it's about what's their development plan, where do they see themselves, because they need to own their own development. If they don't have that passion, they'll just effectively tick in a box. But when I talk to people about, especially at the moment, they kind of go, I want to get into AI. So what does AI mean to you, and why do you want to get into it? Well, it's where the world's going, and it's develop my skill set. How do you think I should do it? What I say is, just do it. Don't do courses. Don't do official courses. Yes, they've got value. They'll give you a basis, but actually just go and do something. So something I've been messaging about on LinkedIn for a couple of months. I'm doing a fox watch at home, where there's a camera out the front of the house and it's counting foxes going backwards and forwards each night. I haven't finished the solution, so nobody criticise me for what's on LinkedIn. But the fact is that I'm keeping my hand in, but I'm experiencing new technologies from Intel and from NVIDIA, and I'm keeping myself current and my own learning continuing down my pathway just by doing something fun. And that's what I say to people is go and get the experience, go and actually do something. One thing that I've said many times recently is you go to uni, you get your degree. I did it, as we said earlier. But once you've got your first job, nobody ever looks at your degree. They just don't. Once you've got experience that's referenceable, that you can then share with somebody you're interviewing with, stories about your practical experiences, nobody cares about the qualification. So to sit down with a potential company or a potential customer, in BearTech's scenario, it's very much a case of referenceable real-world examples. I can sit there and say, we did that here when we did this. Or I can say, when I was a developer, I did X, Y, or Z. And that's what makes the difference. You have to be interested in it, you have to be passionate about it, but then just go and do it. Yeah.
I just want to go into what you've just finished off on there a little bit, because I've been seeing online a lot of that. They say that storytelling's a really, really powerful marketing tool. Obviously, you talked about in context of, I guess, interview there as well, where you can talk about, when I worked here, I did this, and it sort of takes more importance in your degree. Has storytelling helped BearTech when you're speaking to these customers, that you can reference, this is what we did for someone else, this is the experience you've got working in these other businesses? How important do you think it is?
It's invaluable. Firstly, you're talking about customers that you've worked with, you're talking about projects that you've worked on, you're talking about how it refers to the problems that they're looking for you to solve. But what it does is it shares with them the competence of the team. So we could talk about something that we did in robotics. It might not be relevant to somebody that wants to build an app that tracks grass level football. But actually, when you look at it, yes, it isn't directly referenceable and doesn't make the link, but it's a really complex thing. So there's the intelligence in the business, there's the skill set in the business, and we then gain a customer's confidence by just sharing those stories. So sharing those stories is really important. I think the other thing is show your sense of humour. And I think that's sometimes that can be a really big difference maker when I'm interviewing somebody, whether they show their personality, whether they share something. One guy once in an interview, as we walked in, just flippantly said, have you got any jokes? And I just, straight off, there's a joke. And he said that was the difference.
Oh,
That was a terrible joke.
Yeah. I mean, if you put me on the spot like that, I think I'd struggle.
Well, I just said, the first time I saw universal remote controls, I just thought to myself, this is going to change everything.
That's a good one.
That was it, though, and it was just terrible.
Yeah.
But I could think on, and what it showed him was I could think on my feet.
Great. So just wondered when you first started BearTech and what your plans and goals were, have things changed in the months? Because it's still not been a year yet, but in the months since, have your goals and ambitions changed at all?
If we talk about kind of short and medium goals, and we might touch on the long term. When we started the business, we were still looking over our shoulders a little bit. We were still kind of on that mentality of, we don't want to go back into corporate life. We really want nothing to do with corporate. And this business will never be a corporate business. And it's still our goal, that, by the way. It'll never be a corporate business. The language that's used from time to time can be a little bit, but I think it's just being professional. But when we started to work with customers and started to solve problems and understood ourselves better, and then stopped looking over our shoulders and started looking forwards, that's when the business really changed. We started to be more positive on the front foot, getting out, speaking to businesses, speaking to people at networking events, building the recognition for the brand, the business, and then sharing with them the stories of what we do. Recently, we've reflected quite a lot that we don't bang our drum enough, and it's partly down to me. It's one of those things of, that British upper lip where it's like, just enjoy your success. You don't have to talk about it all the time. We're getting advice from marketing teams, which is talk about it as often as possible. And I like to sit down with a customer and I like to share the stories. And we mentioned about storytelling. It's something that we see in that our short term is the evolution of how can we share our experience better with the world to let them know that we're there more. And then, we kind of moved from, is this going to work kind of thing, to let's aim for 50 people working for us. Or then we evolved from, actually, you don't look at how many people work for you. It's into what's the efficiencies of the business. So we're going through a rapid cultural evolution just within kind of myself and Ali, where we're understanding more and more about what we want the business to be. And it'll probably change again before Christmas.
Yeah.
But we're on that journey of trying to understand who we are. We're probably never going to fit into a vertical, like we mentioned earlier. But actually, the tech stack will probably solidify, even though the skill sets are all there. And we'll kind of focus a little bit more. What I don't want to do is not get the variety of opportunities that we have today, where we can, from one meeting to the next, be talking about completely different verticals that challenge my mind, that give me excitement, that get me out of bed, get me jumping up and down, kind of, one day I can be working on chicken farms, the next day I can be working in the legal sector.
Yeah.
And I want that excitement from the team, and I want them to grow. What I do want to see from the team over the next couple of years is the DEI element come in a lot more strongly. But I want to see the personal growth in those individuals. I want to build out true progression planning within the business. Because if we want to grow the business and we want to get to the scale that we want to get to, we're going to have to scale the people a lot. But ideally, we want to be bringing the people that are with us today along on the journey. We want them to grow and develop and become the leaders of the future. They can all do that. It's just if they want to.
Yeah. Did you ever think you would own your own business as you were going through your career? Did you have a burning desire to, or is it just something that sort of happened due to circumstance?
I think I've always been slightly entrepreneurial. I distinctly remember in junior school in Middlesbrough, filling a backpack full of sweets on a Monday morning, selling them at break time and playtime, lunchtime, all that kind of stuff, then refilling the bag and kind of making a bit of money. So I always had that bit to me.
Yeah.
It wasn't a burning desire to own a company. I was just very much a case of I was looking at the problems to solve. Somebody I worked with and actually spoke to a couple of weeks ago, he said to me, once you've worked for yourself, you'll never work for anyone else ever again. And when we have great days at BearTech, great weeks at times, I kind of see what he means. And then when you don't, I kind of think, who would want to do this in the first place?
Yeah.
But I think the interesting thing for me is that we've learned, and that's Ali and I, is anybody can work for themselves. Anyone can start a business. and anybody can go and get the support they need to understand the legalities, because there isn't a playbook. We thought there would be. There isn't a playbook of when your accountants on a monthly basis send you the pay slips, you need to send this money to there and that money to there, and you just think the government takes it all anyway. Would I advise somebody to do it? Yes. But do it at the right time and do it with the right intention.
Yeah.
And the rest will just flow naturally.
Yeah, no, absolutely. What would you say your long-term plans are? Do you have any long-term plans?
Well, we always have aspirational goals. So, yeah, somebody whose opinion I really value kind of once shared with me that 0.1% of businesses get to 10 million turnover. That's the dream. The dream is to do it with as few people as possible to remain as efficient as possible. But the dream is really solve problems every day. And the more problems we solve, the bigger the business will grow. I don't have an exit plan. It's one of those things that I feel is always holds back a management team when they're focused on an exit and a transaction, and we don't. We just focus on what's the next problem to solve, and are we having fun, and am I helping people grow? And when you bring all that together in a business, you're just going to have a load of fun.
Yeah.
And that's really the goal.
Great. Well, Rob, I've really enjoyed having you here today, especially with you being from Teesside, and I love seeing local Teesside success stories. Obviously, as we mentioned, like the economy could be better and there's a lot of things going on. So it's really encouraging, and hopefully with the listeners, they can take some inspiration from it, that it doesn't matter like the timing of the environment, that as long as you're doing good work and you're solving problems and there's a problem to be solved out there, that you can build a business from it and be of value to businesses and customers across the world as well. I also want to thank you for doing a talk at the .NET meetup last time round as well. So that was really handy. So yeah, it's good to see you, making some good traction in the area, and hopefully long may it continue.
Mate, I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah.
And likewise, if anybody sees this and wants to reach out, you don't have to be a developer. If somebody wants to reach out and just talk to somebody about mentorship or guidance, I'm on LinkedIn, and this will be on there as well, won't it?
Yeah, fantastic. Rob,
Brilliant,
thank
mate.
you.
Thanks a lot.